I'm back and welcome to everybody. We are now on the final slideshow of chapter 24, which is on nutrition and metabolism. We are now going to go and move forward past the four macromolecules, the nutrition and metabolism, the four macromolecules. We will start with the metabolic states of the body. These will just take a few minutes, not even 30 minutes. So, uh, take note that our body is in a dynamic state where organic molecules, for exception of the DNA, are continuously broken down and rebuilt. The body uses nutrient pools and it stores amino acids and carbohydrates and fats. And these pools are interconvertible because the pathways are linked by common intermediates, and pretty much the amount and direction of conversion is always directed by the liver. The liver is our metabolic organ, and by the adipose tissues as well, and the skeletal muscles as well. And so, the amino acid pool is a total supply, the body supply of free amino acid. And we have a lot of it. Proteins are constantly lost in the urine, in the hair, in skin cells, and typically we replace that only solely by coming from the food that we are eating. And the pool, the amino acid pool, is our source for resynthesizing body proteins and forming amino acid derivatives and glucose. And we do that, and also by gluconeogenesis, we need this amino acid to form glucose through gluconeogenesis. And the carbohydrate and fat pools, uh, uh, these are easily interconverted through key intermediates. And there are two differences between carbohydrates and fat pools and the amino acid pool. The fats and carbohydrates are oxidized directly to produce energy. These are our key sources of energy. The amino acid, though, must first be converted into the citric acid cycle, keto acid, and then excess carbohydrate and fat can be stored as such. Amino acids are not stored, though, as proteins. So let's take a look at the two states, metabolic states. Okay, the absorptive state is also called the fed state. It lasts for about 4 hours after eating, when absorption of nutrients is actually occurring. Here, you're building up, which means anabolism exceeds catabolism. Excess nutrients are stored as fats if not used. 4 hours after eating, while we are actually doing this and building up, it's better that we actually burn it. So pretty much, it is advisable that we eat our last meal of the day not in the absorptive state, which means when you sleep or go to bed immediately after dinner, you are still in the absorptive state. Your anabolism exceeds catabolism, so your excess nutrients, a lot of the excess nutrients that you are not burning because you are sleeping, are stored as fat. So we have to really use it. So carbohydrates here, glucose here is actually a major cellular energy and can be converted in the liver to glycogen or fat. Glycogen remains in the liver, but fat joins protein to form very low density lipoproteins, which are released to the blood or for storage by adipose tissue. Then you have the blood-borne glucose that enters the cell, and the excess stored as and the excess of which are stored as glycogen in the muscles or fat in the adipose cells. So here's after the major events and the principal metabolic pathways of the absorptive state. The amino acids are anabolically, amino acids are converted to proteins. Your glucose is converted to glycogen. Your glycerol and fatty acids are converted to triglycerides. These are all anabolic. Okay, and pretty much the major energy fuel, our major energy fuel is actually glucose, which is broken down into ATP. Okay, now in the liver, amino acids and deaminated amino acids are deaminated and used for energy or stored as fat. Amino acids will be converted to keto acids, okay, which will be then converted to triglycerides, or some of them are actually converted into ATP. So there, we do have control of the absorptive state. Hormonally, it's controlled primarily by insulin. Insulin secretion by the beta cells of the pancreas, and is stimulated by the levels of glucose or sugar and amino acid, and by parasympathetic stimulation. When insulin binds to the membrane receptors, it facilitates the fusion of glucose into the muscle and adipose tissue. The brain and the liver will take up glucose pretty much without insulin. Insulin is a hypoglycemic hormone that enhances glucose oxidation for energy, and glycogen and triglyceride formation, is also enhancing active transport of amino acids into the cells, and it also enhances protein synthesis. So insulin is not only a sugar carrier, it also inhibits glucose release from the liver and gluconeogenesis. Insulin directly, okay, pretty much directs nearly all of the events of the absorptive state. And right here, you can see the beta cells producing now insulin, and whenever there's actually an increase in blood sugar, okay, there's going to be an increase in blood insulin by the beta cells, which would eventually be resulting in facilitated diffusion of glucose into the tissue cells, causing a drop in blood glucose. Okay, and the drop in blood glucose would have a feedback loop. Once you have a drop in blood glucose, that's going to prevent the beta cells from producing more insulin. Meanwhile, let's go back. Your insulin, the increase in blood insulin would also increase active transport of amino acid into the cells, which would increase protein synthesis. So blood glucose, insulin really is going to stimulate protein synthesis. Now, let's go back to the pretty much the glucose. The glucose now is going to be converted into ATP through cellular respiration, or fatty acid and broken down into converted into fatty acid and glycerol. Pretty much, glucose is actually the one that enhances the conversion of fatty acid, triglycerides into fatty acid and glycerol, and of course the conversion of glycogen, or the formation of glycogen. Let's take a look at some homeostatic imbalance. Diabetes results in inadequate insulin production or abnormal insulin receptors, and they result in the unavailability of glucose to most body cells, and that's not really good. And so glucose now is going to be floating in the blood, which will eventually lead to excessive high glucose blood levels, and glucose also lost in the urine. So you got sugar in the urine. Fats and proteins are pretty much used for energy instead of glucose, which can lead to metabolic acidosis or protein wasting and weight loss. So that's in the absorptive. Now let's go into the post-absorptive state. A few hours after we have already digested, and if we have already like done a little bit of buildup, the post-absorptive state, or the fasting state, is when the GI tract is really empty and energy sources are supplied by breakdown of body reserves. Here we have catabolism of fat, glycogen, protein exceeds anabolism. The goal is actually to maintain blood glucose between meals by making glucose available to blood. And it promotes the use of fats for energy. And glucose sparing pretty much saves glucose for organs that need it most especially the muscles. The brain. The brain is the one that needs it most. Okay, let's take a look at the sources of blood glucose. First, you know already what glycogenolysis is in the liver. It is the first reserve that is being used. Glycogenolysis also in skeletal muscle. Now, before glucose from the liver is exhausted, glycogen that's stored in the skeletal muscle will start to break down. Then you have lipolysis also in adipose tissues and liver. The glycerol used for glucone. This is where we get the glycerol used for gluconeogenesis in the liver. And catabolism of cellular protein. This is when you break down the protein in the cells, which is a major source during prolonged fasting, where you don't have much of the amino acid. Then you start breaking down cellular protein. There's limited amount of protein that can be broken down here before damage. And here, the amount of fat in the body determines how long a person can survive without food. Glucose sparing, uh, which is during happens during prolonged periods of fasting. The body uses non-carbohydrate sources to conserve glucose, and will pretty much like result to gluconeogenesis. More fat and protein are converted to intermediate that can enter the citric acid cycle, which is eventually used for the production of ATP. Brain most especially uses the bulk of glucose while other cells switch to fatty acid and fuel source. The brain cannot use this and will only be using glucose. Um, this results in the production of ketone bodies. And so 4 to 5 days without food, the brain will also start to use these ketone bodies as fuel source because the brain really needs ATP. And so here is the major events and principal metabolic pathways on the post-absorptive state. Well, proteins are actually broken down, so it's all breakdown of major macromolecules that you have eaten or we have built, okay, anabolically into its simplest form. The proteins in amino acid, glycogen into glucose, triglycerides into glycerols, and fatty acid. And here your glucose and fatty acids and ketones are going to get into cellular respiration to produce more ATP. And in the liver metabolism, amino acids are converted to glucose with the help of gluconeogenesis. So let's take a look at hormonal and neural control of the post-absorptive state. Usually the sympathetic nervous system is the one that uh, is pushing on to control the events in post-absorptive state. They are really more complex than absorptive state, which utilizes only one hormone, and that's insulin. Post-absorptive state is triggered by reduced insulin. So, reduced insulin release as the blood glucose level really drops. Now, glucagon is a hormone, it's a hyperglycemic hormone whose release is stimulated by declining blood glucose level. So, when blood glucose level declines in the post-absorptive state, glucagon is now going to be turned on. Okay, it's going to be turned on also by rising amino acid levels, and so glucagon promotes glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis in the liver. Now, lipolysis in the adipose tissue, causing the fatty acids and glycerol also to be released. Now, hepatocytes or in the liver, carry about 500 or so metabolic function. Our liver is really the metabolic organ. It processes nearly every class of nutrients. It plays a major role in regulating plasma cholesterol levels. It stores vitamins and minerals. It metabolizes alcohol, drugs, hormones, and bilirubin. It is a very hard working group of cells, the cells of the liver. And here is actually the metabolic function of the liver, which is actually summarized to you in a table. The carbohydrate metabolism, fat metabolism, protein metabolism, the vitamin and mineral storage, and biotransformation functions. And this table is really very helpful in your studies. Okay. So let's take a quick look at the cholesterol metabolism and regulation of blood cholesterol. Now, cholesterol is not used as an energy source. It is actually a structural basis for bile salts, for steroid hormones, which is one of them is your estrogen and your testosterone, and vitamin D. It's a major component also of the plasma membrane. Now, 50%, 15% of blood cholesterol is actually ingested, but 85% is made by the body, primarily by the liver. As a matter of fact, we don't really need that 15% from our diet. A lot of it is lost when catabolized or secreted in bile salts and that are lost in the feces. So, cholesterol, let's take a look at how cholesterol is transported. Well, um, lipoproteins are special substances that transport water insoluble cholesterol and triglycerides through the blood. And they regulate the lipid entry or exit at target cells. They all contain triglyceride, phospholipids, cholesterol, and protein, these lipoproteins. And they have and in general, the higher the percentage of lipids, the lower will be the density. So the types of transport lipoproteins, okay, first one, you have your high density lipoprotein. You have your very low density lipoprotein. These are more than half the triglycerides with low density of proteins, transport triglycerides from the liver. Okay, mostly adipose. The low density lipoprotein has the highest cholesterol content. They transport cholesterol to peripheral tissues for membranes, storage, or hormone synthesis. And your HDL transports excess cholesterol from peripheral tissues to the liver to be broken down and secreted into the bile. They also provide cholesterol to steroid producing organs. So pretty much we have some recommendation for total cholesterol for the HDL and LDL levels. The maximum total cholesterol, which is 200 milligram per dilution, okay, that's supposed to be the tops. Uh, Anything that's greater than that will be linked to atherosclerosis. Now, more important to measure form, okay, in which cholesterol is transported in the blood. HDL is thought to protect against heart disease because it takes cholesterol out of the blood. So HDL seems to be what we commonly call as the good cholesterol. Okay, and greater than 60 milligram per dilution is better. Okay, and less than 40 is not so good. Now, the LDL, or the low density lipoprotein, okay, pretty much encourages cholesterol deposits in the blood vessels. So 100 milligrams or less is good, and 130 or above is not good. So, factors regulating blood cholesterol level. The liver produces cholesterol as a basal level at the basal level, regardless of dietary cholesterol intake. There's no reason why we should be taking in or eating food that are rich in cholesterol because our liver produces it. Okay, so we have to restrict dietary cholesterol. Now, the more important effect is the relative amount of saturated and unsaturated fatty acid. The saturated fatty acid would stimulate liver synthesis of cholesterol and inhibit cholesterol excretion from the body. That's why saturated fat is not good for us. The unsaturated fatty acid, on the other hand, would enhance excretion of cholesterol into bile salts. So we have to make sure that our diet is rich in unsaturated fatty acid instead of butter or bacon. So trans fat can occur whenever healthy oils are chemically transformed into solids. An example of this would be margarine. They have worse effect on cholesterol level than saturated fats, and they increase LDL and they reduce HDL. Okay, so margarine, which is for the most part, there are some margarine that really has a good amount of trans fat. We do not want those. Now, unsaturated omega-3 fatty acid, they are found in fish, have lower proportion of saturated fats and cholesterol. and they make the platelets less sticky, and they help prevent spontaneous clotting. They have anti-arrhythmic effect on the heart. They are really very good and can lower blood pressure. So eating fish, even if they are oily fish such as salmon, is really good. So factors regulating blood cholesterol. Let's continue on. Stress, cigarette smoking have been shown to lower the HDL. And this is not good. Okay, aerobic exercise and estrogen increase HDL, which is good, and they would decrease LDL levels. So there is actually like some sort of a clue that that our body gives us. If our body shape changes into the shape, let's say, of an apple, where fat is carried in the upper body, it is correlated with high cholesterol and LDL levels. If our body shape is fair, fat is carried on the hips and thighs, it's actually correlated with lower cholesterol and LDL levels. So the risk factors for cardiovascular disease, okay, previously high cholesterol and LDL HDL ratios were used as predictors of potential disease, but they're not really found to be reliable. Now LDL level is the other risk factor that I believe to be more accurate. So we have to increase our HDL and really decrease the LDL levels. And there are treatments for high LDL levels, and one of them is statins. These are cholesterol lowering drugs. An estimated about 10 million Americans take this, and most especially that includes your Professor Coyne. We're done for now, guys, and good luck in your tests.